Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's obligatory, feels like it's obligatory after the last full council meeting that the person at the top table should press the wrong button several times before getting it right. But I thought I'd do it right first time, just to break with the tradition that was started. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, the 29th of October 2024. Please be advised, everybody present, that this is a public meeting and is being live streamed and on video, I'm told today, on the council's YouTube channel. So all those people who made an extra special effort for the cameras will be feeling pleased with themselves. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, item 2. Apologies for absence and substitutes.
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Tovell and Councillor Tipple, and Councillor Tovell's substitute is Councillor Bailey.
Thank you. Looking at now to the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 10th of September. Blimey, a long while ago. Does anybody have any comments to make on them? Okay, they seem to be in order, so we accept them as they are. Chairman's announcements. The only thing to say was that we have, I'd spoken and I've met with Corinne about the report that we'd asked for a little bit more detail around the customer service improvement programme and all those steps, and with the support of Paul making some excellent suggestions, and we've tried to find a way to meet the committee's questions and also provide something which is of use to us, and hopefully something that can then be added to and extended and used at some point in the future for a future framework for feeding back on this process. Because Corinne was due to do a report at a later meeting in the next few weeks, we thought it best to hold that over so she can do both together rather than making her come and do a report and then make it happen again. So hopefully we're getting somewhere with that, and I know that that will be coming forward at some point in the future. And I'd like to thank Paul Newstead for his really good comments, which is what I very much supported. Public speaking.
There's no public speaking, Chairman.
Okay, let's move to the Cabinet reports then. The Norfolk Nutrient Mitigation Fund update, and the lead officers on this are Molly and Rodney.
Good evening. I'm Molly Roscoe, and I've been working on the Nutrient Mitigation Fund for the past 6 months alongside Rodney. Just to give a brief summary of the report in front of you, Broadland was awarded £9.6 million to tackle nutrient mitigation in Norfolk, which was used to establish a capital loan scheme to fund mitigation projects. Some of the interest earned from the £9.6 million was also used to establish a feasibility fund grant scheme of £200,000, which has funded feasibility work for potential mitigation projects. As you can see from the table in the report, we are currently oversubscribed for both feasibility and capital. We anticipate the capital loan needs will be met as this money is a recyclable loan pot. However, without an increase into the feasibility fund, we would have to stop the feasibility fund. Yet feedback has shown the feasibility grant scheme is important to help develop projects that may otherwise be significantly delayed or not progress at all. This report proposes using some of the remaining interest of the £9.6 million to increase the fund from £200,000 to £400,000. This matches the current oversubscription needs of the feasibility grant. This report also recommends, for administrative efficiency, that delegation is given to the Assistant Director of Finance in consultation with the leader to allocate the remainder of the interest as required to support the nutrient mitigation work.
Thank you. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask or say regarding this? Martin.
Thank you. It was around the capital fund, and obviously the way that, and again, it might be my understanding of how it worked and then worked, because I thought this was going to be a churn fund.
Sorry, if you had to bring the microphone in here. I know you're very quietly spoken.
Yeah.
It's always welcome, but yeah.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah. So Yes, okay, the progress to date around the, in table 2.1, the amounts awarded and then the decisions pending, because I thought this was a churn fund, and therefore the available credits should have been there, therefore, but what this doesn't show, therefore, is the credits that have been given to be utilised against the fund. Am I misreading?
You're correct, this is a revolvable funds, but the way it works, so for instance, that first investment of 1.2 million in March will come back again in March 25. So it's the people we're giving the money to will get involved in trading the credits, and by their surplus from selling the credits, they'll then have that money to repay our loans. So that's how it works. So that 1.2 million will come back in March 25, which can then be used for further investments after that. And then one in July 24, I think it's about first repayment is about 18 months' time before that one starts coming back.
Okay, and so with the available funds that have been given so far, do we know the volume of credits that have been, how many houses has that released?
I currently don't have that statistics in front of me right now for you, as this is for the feasibility fund amount, but I can go away and find that information and bring it back to you if you would like that.
So when we originally had the proposal around the mitigation fund, I asked if we could have like an area map for where the feasibility had been generated, and therefore also that where that would release the credits to, so that we have like just an understanding of what the fund was actually doing and utilising it. But I still haven't seen anything around that.
Again, due to the amount of, I think it was about August time feasibility funds were started allocating, so we're fairly new into the process of monitoring, but we're currently working a way to do that, so we're happy to start create a program that's good for you.
You might see, but we have actually now got a map that we shared with the member working, or we've got requests from the member working group, so we have got a map of where these schemes are, so that certainly can be circulated to ONS.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask, yes, effectively you're asking for an additional £200,000 for the feasibility fund from investment income. How confident are you about the investment income of just shy of 580,000? How have you arrived at that figure? Is it a fixed rate of interest we're getting, or is it variable? Or have you taken any discounts in interest rates varying between now and March when the interest is due?
This money is just placed with the normal council investments overall, and the way we're allocating it is basically based on the base rate. So we'll work out the balance on this money and give the base rate to the nutrient mitigation fund. Although if there's our specific investments, then actually they will earn a specific amount of interest on those investments. So it's been fully calculated out to get that not £590,000, and we are very confident that will be very close to being achieved, because actually a lot of these investments are already made and we're already significantly way through the year, and we're not seeing the interest rate falling down. To give it in context, you say about £10 million, sort of a 5% interest rate on that is £500,000. So you can see that number is in the right ballpark.
Shane.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarity for me, please. The feasibility fund, that amount, once it's been spent, am I right in thinking that that's it, it's gone, that money's gone? Yeah? Yeah, so that being the case, I mean, the additional money that's being put in from interest that's gained from the money that's in the bank, when we get to a point where the money that's in the bank has now all been allocated, then that interest will stop. So is this like a short-term solution just to sort of keep things moving along? And what would happen later on if the amount of money coming back in isn't sufficient to generate interest, which would then increase feasibility funds.
So when we make loans, we charge interest on these loans as well. So actually, if it's not in our bank, it's because it's been made for a bid that we've funded a capital scheme for, and those bids will generate interest or return as well. So it should be recyclable with the money coming back and interest on each of these loans being made. There might be some instances where we don't charge interest on a investment. That's unusual if that was, don't be the case, but it is possible that sometimes there might be a scheme that is so beneficial that we don't charge interest on the loan. But in general, we are looking at making sure that any loans are done at a commercial interest rate.
So what you're saying is that at the moment, the feasibility fund is not sufficient enough, but there may come a point where there is enough feasibility to sort of keep everything going and not slow things down.
At the moment, we've put that cap of suggested 400,000 on that total amount of feasibility funding. If we wanted to increase it more than that, we'd either have to come back again to ask to go up over 400,000, or the new delegation that's being proposed would allow that to be done by myself in consultation in due course. But we didn't want to have this as an open-ended pot for feasibility work.
I was just asking, do all these studies of these feasibility cases in this in these examples here, do they create a precedent for meaning that we can make swifter judgments about sites and possibilities of things, which means there's less need for the feasibility of sites to be assessed in the future? Do you know what I mean? What you say is we end up with so many sites across the district that we go, oh, we've looked at one like that before, so therefore we can actually say to people pretty much straight up, you don't need to do a feasibility on that. We can tell you straight away that that would be suitable or not. I'm wondering, does this investment actually lead to perhaps some savings on this, something to do this in the future?
Yes and no is the answer to that. Each scheme tends to be slightly different, so they'll need to do that feasibility work, particularly on some of the bigger wetland proposals. We are seeing a bit more of a trend of septic tanks, so we are hoping that actually it'll start becoming a bit more of a standard model for this. But even with a septic tank upgrade scheme, we're still seeing the need for, when you've got a proposal, to look at each of these individual sites to make sure that's suitable. So although there will be some opportunity to standardise it, there's still going to be a bit of bespoke work needed for every single individual application. But it's something we need to keep under review. The idea of the feasibility is very much to help people bring forward proper schemes, and if that need isn't there anymore, there's no reason for us to actually give these sort of money in grants anymore. So it's under review.
Has anybody else got anything else they'd like to add? Martin.
So it's one just question I missed off here. With all the decisions, bearing in mind it's across the various different councils, have the capital projects been broadly based across the different councils, or has it all been from a select few?
We've been evaluating both the feasibility and capital applications as and when they come in. Whether they are geographically is a consideration, but as we're fairly new in the start of the nutrient mitigation in Norfolk, the opportunity for us is to enhance nutrient mitigation credits. Is certainly something we need to consider in the future, but at the moment we are at the start of nutrient mitigation credits.
And the big scheme we've awarded so far is the 2.2 million for septic tanks, which is basically wherever the septic tanks are, so it is already encouraging quite a large coverage of this sort of thing. But it's something we need to keep under review, because actually we don't want to have too many credits available in one area and not enough in another area. But at the moment we're just keen to get as many of these going as possible, because there's still a lot more demand out there for credit than there is available supply at the moment.
So that the 7.7 million it is not. We haven't got a breakdown of where that relates to, as far as the different councils or the different rivers or anything else.
That will be clear when we show you that map.
Right, if no one else has got anything else to say, I just want to say actually well done on this, because when this was brought to us a few months ago, the whole idea of a feasibility fund was about, let's hope we get some people coming forward, and that, you know, this will hopefully get some people really looking into things that they hadn't considered before. It seems to be that you become victims of your own success here, that we've had lots of people come forward, and you know that money has gone much quicker than we anticipated, and this will open the door to the much needed development in parts of the district if this all goes through and we find the right credits for allowing for nutrient mitigation. So well done on this personally, and well done for coming up with a swift solution to what appears to be would have been a bit of a logjam with people coming forward with new ideas in the future. That was my personal opinion, but of course we need to get to the vote on whether we accept the proposals. All those in favour of the proposals or the recommendation as laid out in the agenda?
And that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. We now go on to the tenancy strategy with the lead officer, Richard Densire.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I've got a number of reports again today. First one's tenancy strategy. As the report details, I won't go into massive amounts of details, but the Localism Act 2011 requires us to have a tenancy strategy. We haven't had one in place up until now. Our movement towards being an RP has made it ever more important to have a tenancy strategy, which is why I bring it in front of you today. The purpose of a strategy is to provide guidance and levels of expectations to social and private landlords in our district. Hopefully the rent which is then charged, the type of tenancy afforded to residents, and the strategies that the council may use to impact their service delivery. This in turn also will impact our council-owned companies as well. So Broadland Living, it will provide some kind of framework and guidance for the kind of tenancies that we would like to see occur. This is your opportunity as members to be able to put a footprint on how you would like tenancies to be afforded to your residents, which is the purpose of a strategy. I wasn't going to talk any more about this, Chair, on this point, because it really is there all within the report, and it's there to make sure that our residents get the right tenancies that they should be afforded. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask or say? Fran.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just a couple of things. I just wanted to be clear around, we're talking about affordable rent as opposed to social rent. Obviously, affordable rent is higher than social rent. As it in the paper is clear in there, but we're talking about the increase there, and obviously with our own properties, that money would come back to us through Broadland Living. But if they're with other registered providers, I take it that money goes back to the likes of Clarion or private, etc. So where is the benefit for us? Is there any benefit for us as a council for that, apart from obviously, you know, we've still got someone home, which is fantastic. But I just wondered if there was any real benefit to us apart from in our own properties. So that was a question. Thank you.
So the advantage of charging affordable rent, I take the point. Affordable rent is not always affordable. Okay, so it's 80% of market rent. So it's not always affordable to our residents. However, it does increase the feasibility for social housing to develop and to deliver within our area. So whilst it's not, I would much prefer social housing, I really would. But you often get a choice between 10 affordable housing properties or one social rent. And although affordable is not always affordable across the board, is based on what the private rental market is for that particular area. So we have pockets which are, of course, going to be more expensive for affordable rent. I would love social rent to be there because then that would be affordable to our people that need our help. However, a vast majority of our district do still prove affordable, still within the LHA rates, local housing allowance rates, even if they do charge affordable. That means the housing association is getting more money. We become more of an attractive place for people to develop, to deliver within our area, and therefore, hopefully, we get more social housing and more investment into our area.
Hi. On page 23, you talk about landlords addressing all mandatory eviction concerns. I'm a bit concerned there's nothing else in this about safeguarding residents from being evicted when it's no fault of their own. Is this not, it's not covered in this report?
Bear with me 2 seconds. So the problem is, we could ask nicely. This is the problem with tenancy strategy. Whilst it is, it's a recommendation from council how we would like people to behave. However, with no fault evictions, there's nothing we can do until that legislation has gone through Parliament. Once that's gone through Parliament, then of course I can add it. But what I didn't want to equally do is put something in here which says don't do no fault evictions, because then I have no means of it kind of waters down the effectiveness of every other recommendation, because it's a bit of an empty threat, whereas let's try and make sure in here stuff which is actually palatable and it provides guidance to people delivering houses within our area. I'm hopeful, as much as everyone I'm sure in this room is, that Renters Reform Bill, or Renters Right Bill now it's called, will get through Parliament, and then of course we can look to add it in the future. It will be reflected in legislation as well, so possibly something I can add as a delegated power as well, rather than come through the governance process.
Helena.
Thank you. Yes, this tenancy strategy was looked at by the Communities Housing and Planning Policy Development Panel on the 11th of September. We asked a number of questions. We're happy with the replies. I'm very happy to support this tenancy strategy as a result. I mean, I think we obviously need to have a tenancy strategy. We're now a registered provider of housing, so yeah, very happy to support it.
Thank you. Can I just ask, obviously it's very much a sort of procedural, you have to have one of these, and it's also a list of recommendations based on national legislation, as you say. Is there anything within this which is specifically Broadland? And it's not a sort of trick question, but is there anything, if I was to look at South Norfolk's or, you know, West Suffolk or, you know, Somerset or whatever, and I looked at their strategy, would there be anything that would stand out and go, we are doing something a little bit different here? Just, and that's not meant as a trick or, you know, if the answer is no, I completely understand because it's still based on national legislation, but I'm just wondering if there's anything which we can say, yeah, oh, that's interesting.
I can't talk for how many districts and strategies that they have. What I can say is a particular point of scrutiny that we had both through BDC exec and through the committees was based on the our wording around fixed terms tenancies and how we're going to support those fixed terms tenancies. So I won't go into detail what it's changed, but that's had a lot of scrutiny, and the way in which you have to support fixed term tenancies in some ways because they are useful. For example, if you place someone in DA hostel accommodation, you do not want them to be there forever. You want them to have a long-term accommodation and a proper offer. So there are suitable times to have fixed term tenancies, but more people support them on a far wider footprint, and we've been quite specific on how we want fixed term tenancies to be used in here. So I'd say that's the one thing in here that we have done.
Thank you. If there's no one else got anything else to say, move to the recommendation, which is laid out again now. I'm not going to read out because my voice is almost failing me as I keep going on. So all those in favour?
And that goes unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Richard. I would say you're welcome to go, but you're not, because you're up now for registered provider policies So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. They're very similar policies, but they're very different. I was going to do what I did last time with the RP policies and go through each one, and then go to the recommendation at the end, if that's okay, just for the speed of time. As you can see within the report, I've laid out a summary of each policy at the beginning. So the first one is the void management policy. To create a little bit of background, first of all, this is all housework, largely because we are an RP. I came last time and did a number of policies. This is 4 more. I've got 1 more after this, and then you won't have to listen to me anymore, I promise you, until we have to review these in 2 years. So the first one is the void management policy. We need to turn around our voids as quickly as possible. We need to make sure there is no loss of accommodation through a void process. We need to make sure that people are effectively managed if they are not living in their temporary accommodation. We are continuing to see massive demands for temporary accommodation. We need every unit filled as much as we possibly can, and this policy talks about how we will go about doing so. Chair.
Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? Fran.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely something we need to have in place, and it's so important, the voids, you know, not only for having accommodation, but also loss of income as well. That's there. Well, what I wanted to ask was a couple of questions around, it was actually both on page 31, actually. We don't make any reference in here to making our properties more, sort of, dare I say, disabled friendly, so they're more accessible. And I wondered if we should do, so, you know, I think we should, you know, obviously we're covered by Disability Discrimination Act, etc. So that was one thing. But also, on the rechargeable repairs, we talk about, you know, when someone leaves a property, and obviously if there's a significant amount of damage, recharging someone, well, the chances are, you know and I know, tracking them down and getting that money back is going to be very, very difficult. What my question is, how much of an inspection regime is there during the period of time in which someone is actually in the tenancy? Are there periods that we can go in on a regular basis and actually check it, particularly if we know they're getting towards the end of the tenancy, you know, that they are going to be moving on? Can we go in and visit the property before they leave, so that we can hopefully address any repairs and charging that we may need to have before the point that they flee? I didn't mean that, perhaps that's not the right word, but they leave the property. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll deal with both points. So the disabled adapted properties, you are right, that's something we need to potentially look at from Broadland. Me and Councillor Harpley were just talking about it, weren't we, in the portfolio briefing. When we look at our assets moving forwards, we need to make sure we're being able to offer across a whole. Again, the one team, sorry I have to say, South Norfolk do have disabled adapted properties, invested in Clare House as well. You have access to those accommodations as possible in equal way that South Norfolk can utilise your single person accommodation. So as a one team stock, where your residents are looked after, but from a one council point of view, there is something we need to look at our asset strategy to make sure we've got those kind of stock. Second one is we're there a lot. So within the business case for buying the properties, I did for every 10 units we have 1 member of staff. That means we can be there plenty. We're probably there more than they would like us to. The problem is they want us there because we're the conduit. The team who are there are the conduit to make sure to their new home. So they want to work for us. The problem we have is when they're not working with us and they end up putting their head in the sand. We're quite quick to be able to deal with that because they're only under a licence rather than a tenancy, but still you've got to go through the process to gain access, and people will cause damage, and you do have to create recharge. If they were to come back to us though, we have something in our allocations policy that says you can't have a social house when you owe us a bit of money. So then they're eager to come up with a payment arrangement because then that allows them access to social housing when they do come back. So we still have that ability. Was it carrot and stick? We have both. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Richard, obviously it's crucial to make sure that the void management policy is as effective as possible. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, you're not the only one losing your voice, so am I. Do we have any data? I mean, how can we, going forward, how can we make sure that the void management is being as efficiently as it can be, and we are actually improving on it?
I'm going to hold my hands up and say no, right now we can't. It's something I'm really eager to have. I've tasked my system and information officers to make sure we do that. We have it for a limited amount of our stock, but we don't have it for everything. It's quite a big job to extrapolate that information upwards. But I need, for our business case, I need at least 85% occupancy. So for me to make sure I'm meeting the financial ask of our business case, I need to know that there are 85% occupancy. So I'm going to hold my hands up and say no right now, but I've asked for it to be in place by the beginning of the financial year. And they are busy working away, trying to figure out how they're going to do it. I'm also linking in with Corin's team for a TSR, I can't remember what TSR stands for, Transformation Service Review. Thank you very much, Debbie. To have a look at, because we've become a big tenancy provider. Let's have a look at how we've done that and whether we can review and whether there's things we need to put in place. So I've voluntarily tried to get that done.
Peter, then Caroline.
One of the benefits of being old is you get your flu jab and you get your COVID jab. So I can speak and I'm not losing my voice. If you're in the private sector, you would have to put a deposit or a bond down in order to secure rented property. Can't we do something similar, or is that just an impossible ask? Because obviously, if you put a bond down or a deposit, you have a means of actually charging people for not leaving things in a good state of repair.
I'd love to, but unfortunately we can't. So we have a duty to, these are homeless people. This is under temporary accommodation. It's not a rental arrangement, it's a licensed arrangement. We have a duty to accommodate. We've got to put them in there. The only option I could do for that would be to put them in a very expensive bed and breakfast and say, look at this property, if you'd like to live here, you've got to pay me some money. And they'll go, well, I'll just sit in this B&B, thanks, because it's not costing me any money and it's costing us a fortune. So that's the only way I could get round that. So unfortunately not, sorry. Okay.
Caroline.
Richard, I hope you don't think I'm being a bit pedantic here, but under point 9, general, it said all void properties will be cleaned, including any mould removed. Should that not include mould removed and treated?
By all means, that can be amended, yes.
Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a very comprehensive review there. Would you say there's any safeguards? Because my concern is the situation of properties being used for cookering and becoming drug dens. I mean, have we got enough safeguards in place to alleviate that, prevent it?
I can hand on heart say yes. A lot of boarding stock are HMO, housing multiple occupation anyway. We put CCTV in outside and in communal areas. They're generally shared accommodation, so trust me, if someone's doing something they shouldn't, another resident's going to ring and tell us, and we're in there regularly anyway. I'd be amazed if that happened. I can't say it will never happen, but in our stock, I'd be amazed.
We seem to have exhausted the questions regarding the Appendix 1. Do you want to go through any of the other parts? Yep.
Just bear with me while I go back to the... I've skipped over it now. The next one is the tenancy forward. So, sorry, you're just going to have to bear with me because I would rather not rush it. So I can't find it. I give up. Right, tenancy fraud policy. This is not, so we need to have one as an RP. because, and as a council, we need to have a tenancy for policy. However, bearing in mind what I've just said, that all our accommodation is under temporary accommodation, therefore their licences, the chances of this happening are slim to none. As their licence, if we find someone who is fraudulently claiming, we simply just end their duty, their homeless duty, and therefore their temporary accommodation ends. However, this policy allows us to make sure that we are robustly covered. If we are challenged, if we do quickly end someone's duty and therefore their duty to accommodate, this allows us to be backed up if we are challenged through policy and ombudsman.
Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask on that, or would we move on? Okay, let's move on to Appendix 3, Temporary Accommodation Charging Recovery of Arrears Policy.
This is really challenging me because I keep trying to find my list of appendices, but don't worry, I will go for this. So this was rechargeable repairs collection, yes? Going back to the first policy, we need to make sure that we can collect our rechargeable repairs and any arrears in an effective manner. We need to make sure that we have a policy. We need to make sure that there's continuity throughout the team and there's a process throughout the team. This policy allows us to do so. So it provides us, my team, the guidance and oversight that they require. You the opportunity to make sure we're doing that in a fair and equitable way. We need to make sure that we balance against the vulnerable nature of our residents, against the fact that we do need to make sure that they do not cause damage and they do pay their rent, because if people don't pay their rent, our financial modelling does not stack up, and our already difficult financial position regarding temporary accommodation would only get worse. So we do need processes and policies in place to allow us to effectively chase that money. Thank you.
And unless anybody's got anything they'd like to ask here, we'll just move on to your final point, which was the antisocial behaviour policy, which I think you touched on quite a lot of the elements within that, but you might want to expand on it if you've got anything else to say.
Again, very similar to the charging and recovery arrears policy. We need to be able to have a policy and process in place to detail how we will deal with antisocial behaviour. I do not want to evict people straight away just because they've annoyed each other as residents, but similarly, if they're taking serious drugs in your temporary accommodation, that's not very nice, especially when they're sharing with other people and they need to understand that they're going to be evicted as a consequence of that. So again, this policy is in place to make sure we gain that balance between fairness and also providing us the power to create the outcomes we need, which are fair enough for our residents. Thank you.
Okay, and that's a breakdown of all those separate appendices. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? Lacey.
Thank you, Richard. September, which one? On page 25, 3.1, it says September, and I did bring it up at community. I did. Yeah.
Can I apologise? I meant to put September 2023 in there. That was yeah, because unfortunately we've gone past the September, so it implies we've only just become an RP, and it has been 13 months. Thank you.
Time flies when you're having fun. Fran.
Just a little thing I wanted to ask you, Richard, was around, it's in Appendix 4, it's page 43, it's 1.4. We're saying that if there's a criminal activity around ASB, we will expect residents to report, and it was just on Peter's point really around sort of cuckooing. Obviously we would expect people to report under normal circumstances, but some people are victims. It was just a subtle point, but I just thought, well, not everyone, we couldn't expect everyone to be expected to do it, that was all, and I just wondered if we could sort of nuance that a little bit. Thank you.
We can. The reason we put that in there as well is, it's similar when you call and do a safeguarding referral. When I ring up, they say, were you the person that saw the safeguarding concern, and go, no, I wasn't. And they go, well, could you ask the person who saw the safeguarding concern to call, because then we can ask them the detailed question. It's a similar problem with the police. So, of course, if we hear something, we will liaise with the police and we will happily talk them through it. But it's always better if the person that's witnessed the criminal activity to contact the police themselves, which is why we wanted to put it in there, to put the emphasis on them. But of course, if they're not comfortable to do so, we would not be holding back liaising with the police, because we just walk over to them in the OPT and explain what's happening. Yes.
Okay, unless anybody else has got anything else they'd like to say or ask, let's just go to the recommendations, which the Cabinet to take note of all policies and recommend council their adoption. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Showing a good knowledge even when you couldn't get to your notes, so well done. Next, review of environmental penalties, and Nick Howard. Hi, Nick. Over to you.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. So this just present to you the current, just to say the current penalties are £300 for fixed penalty notice, reduced to £230 on early payment. There's a small number of offences here in the paper in front of you, and they arise from regulations from July 2023. So the maximum amounts which we can levy as fixed penalty notices as a district council have been raised. That's really helpful to tackle the ongoing problem of fly tipping, and we are ranging all of our powers and measures to do so. So just a few things to say. First of all, the purpose here then of this report is to decide at what level environmental penalties for certain offences should be set following the introduction of those new amounts. Taking fly tipping as an example, the proposals in this report would see a full range of penalties put in place, from the very minimum for the most minor offence to the maximum amount that's applied by law. They'd also provide for early payment discounts, and of course early payment discounts allow people to regularise to a degree what they've done to avoid being prosecuted, and that saves the local authority all the time and expense of doing so. So it's an expedient enforcement mechanism. Officers have researched and identified that there isn't a consistent approach or amount that's levied by different district councils. We found one example where a matrix approach was used, and we felt that had some significant merits. So at Appendix 5, there's a set of tables for you. One of those is the degree of culpability of the offender, and one of those is the degree of harm that they cause in the offence. Whether that's public or private land, the council will investigate and it will carry out enforcement activity. We simply don't remove waste from private land at the taxpayer's expense. So, just to say then, there's a range of offences, as I say. The table at Appendix 3 proposes 2 sets of penalty amounts in Table 5. So that's one set of penalty amounts for householder offences and one set of penalty amounts for non-householder offences. We've left it that way because it leaves no gap between those who could be dealt with for offences. Table 6 proposes penalty amounts for a householder duty of care offence. We recognise that householders, although we put our efforts into awareness raising and education, have differing understandings about when an offence might be committed. So we will continue to work with householders, but it is appropriate when we can't demonstrate who has fly tipped the waste to go back to the householder where it originated and to have a conversation about on what basis did you allow somebody to take your waste away for you, if indeed that's what's happened. That's what the householder duty of care offence is all about. Of course, appropriate use of informal warnings will continue to be made in circumstances that are appropriate, and there are circumstances where fixed penalty notice is simply not a severe enough penalty for the offence. So, Chair, that's just to say, just to wrap up the report, the recommendations as you see are on the face of the report, to adopt the matrix approach and the full amounts of environmental crime penalty charges in Appendix 2 and Appendix 3, and to agree and to adopt reduced amounts for early payments, and finally to implement the new charges from the 1st of January 2025.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? Fran?
Hey, Chairman, sorry. It was on page 54, appendix 3. It was to do with the early payment charges there, and I just wondered how we came down to the percentages we ended up with, because on the householder, on table 5 this is, on the householder amounts, the early payment amount is 2/3, so it's, well, 67% near enough, but and for other people or organisations it's 3/4, so 75%. And when you look at table 6, it seems pretty random really, because you're talking about sort of 3/4, 2/3, and the last one is, well, 11/16, so it's 69% or thereabouts. And I just thought that there seemed to be no consistency throughout, and I just wondered what the rationale was for this. But I like the matrix idea. I think that's a really good idea to actually sort of, say this is, more harm, should we say, and so we should charge more. But I just wondered where we got these percentages from, because they do seem a little random. Thank you.
In part for accounting purposes, we're encouraged to use relatively round numbers, and the intention has been, where possible, to apply a 1/3 discount for early payment in the case of domestic residents, and a 25% or thereabouts reduction in relation to more commercial offences. So that's where the balance sits between the two. The smaller the amount, the more difficult it is to arrive at that rounded amount in each case. So by inspection, that's why we've allocated the bounds as we have.
Just coming back, could that be challenged then, from an equality point of view? Could anyone actually challenge it legally to say this is very random, you're not applying it across the board? That's what I'm saying. From that point of view, is it challengeable? Thank you.
Correctly and appropriately made decisions on fixed penalties are a matter for the district council, and it can apply those levels where it does. If there were any challenge, it's more likely to come in terms of the interpretation of why am I sitting at a band 5 rather than a band 4, or a band 1 rather than a band 2, and officer guidance will be put in place where any uncertainty about consistency would be referred to the service manager, so that we can have a good, consistent approach. So that's the more likely question, and we've arranged ourselves to be ready for that. In terms of the amounts that are set, the district council is perfectly entitled to set the amounts where it wishes. So I don't see a risk of challenge. No.
Tony.
Nick, can I just ask, obviously, if a householder makes a mistake and has to pay a fine, the levels, and it's a first-time offence, then the levels seem to be quite reasonable. Do you feel the new upper limit is high enough to actually deter people from offending?
With the present levels of fine, we are finding that we're getting a high level of early payment compliance, and that would indicate that they are ranged at about the right level. However, we recognise that there are potentially some more minor offences in terms of low harm and low culpability. Nevertheless, it's an offence. It's an offence that does merit a fixed penalty notice. So based on our experience to date, we feel that the deterrence is going to work and that the early payment amounts are appropriate. They're partly factored into the experiences that we have to date.
Anybody else? Shane.
Thanks, Jay. It's a very, very small point, but just looking at table 5 and table 6, the householder amounts are almost identical on the first 3 lines, except for on table 6, where the early payment amount is 275, and on table 5 it's 270. It's just a very, very small inconsistency, but everything else seems to be exactly the same. Just wondered if, sort of why really?
When the officers were preparing the matrix and looking at the approach and the experience that they've had, they worked on each separate area of offending separately. I don't think that inconsistency has been identified up to now. But I don't think anyone's going to be charged for both and wonder why they got £5 off for one or £5 more for the other. So although they are slightly different, it's not likely to affect the same person at any time. So, but I noticed the relationship now that you say it, and we haven't seen that before. It's a matter that Cabinet could take a view on, but yes. Yeah, the bandings are slightly different. It doesn't fall at the same category. It's not like the top one in each has only got a £5 differential. So they are inspected against our experience of what we feel is likely to give you the best effect in terms of deterrence.
Anybody else? Yeah, sorry.
I just wondered if you feel that the amount of fine is comparable to the cost of cleaning it up and the officer's time. Thanks.
The amount of fine is not comparable to the cost of cleaning it up, and those two things sit side by side. If cases are prosecuted, then magistrates will determine what level of compensation might be awarded alongside any fine that might be issued. As a district council, we don't have the opportunity to do that on a case-by-case basis. There's no provision in the regulations to penalise according to the precise clean-up cost. And if take for example liquid fly tipping, and there have been instances of oils being tipped, for example, they're really difficult to recover from the ground, and they can be persistent and long-lasting effects. Likewise, if waste is distributed by throwing it into the woodland, and that's happened on occasion, that's more difficult to recover and clean up than a couple of bags or an amount that's just situated close together by the side of the road. So the fines don't account for the amount of clean-up work that would be required. If there's a more significant amount of clean-up work required, it might militate against the use of a fixed penalty notice, or at least lead to a higher level of fine. But sadly, we can't cover the costs of clean-up in the fines.
No one else wanted to say something. Actually, the 2 points I was going to make have just been dealt with in the last two questions. So I was going to point out the inconsistency between the 400 and both those columns, and I was going to also ask to what extent we were still cleanups were still being subsidised by taxpayers even at this new rate. So that's been dealt with. Thank you very much indeed. We'll go to the recommendations, of which there are 3, and I'm not going to read them out because we can all read. But all those in favour of accepting those recommendations.
That's unanimous. Harry.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Nick. And we move on to whistleblowing policy and Emma.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So before you is an update to the whistleblowing policy that we have across the council. There are only minor updates brought. Normally I would deal with these under my delegation, but it's been a while since we've brought this to you, so we thought we'd bring this in to raise awareness, and then we'll also be doing some training on the back of it. Section 3 of the report sets out the changes that I've made. Current post holder details were updated due to changes in staff. The internal references have been amended to the current council policies. I've reviewed the legislation to make sure it remains up to date, and the organisational name change from public concern at work to protect has also been amended. Contact information in relation to organisations have been referenced, and I have updated the equality impact assessment as well. For information for overview and scrutiny, this was discussed at Audit Committee on Thursday. The questions asked there were in terms of has this policy been invoked in recent years. I can confirm that no, it hasn't. Something was raised a few years ago, but it was in fact dealt with under a different policy. I would be concerned if this was used a lot, because actually culturally there's a lot of other steps that we would expect to happen if people had things to raise. So I think if this was being used a lot, it would indicate an issue. So I take assurance over the fact that that hasn't been invoked. We talked about training and making sure that actually it can be a bit of a dry policy, so making sure that the training brings that to life and uses some real life examples so it's clear how we then communicate that out. I provided assurance that to the best of my knowledge it has all been covered, and the team have also looked at that for me, and I think, Tony, that was everything we discussed at Audit Committee. Yeah. So happy to take any questions from ONS, Chair.
Does anybody have any questions? Fran?
Thank you. It was just a detail, really. On Appendix 1, you've got the contacts for whistleblowing. and I noticed that the leader of the council had no telephone number, but also there's no telephone number for the Serious Fraud Office. I just wondered if there should be. That was my only questions really, but apart from that, I was happy with it. But I just thought, yeah, should we have phone numbers for these people? Thank you.
Yep, so we put them in where we can. I can obviously add the leader's phone number in, and the other one, they don't provide one for this route. You can contact them in any other way you wish, but for whistleblowing, don't pick up the phone.
Does anybody else have anything? Okay, thank you. It reminds me a little bit, I know in teaching and anybody who works in certain other professions, we have a similar thing in terms of LADO, Local Authority Designated Officer, and everyone knows that they can call them. I've never had to call them, and I don't know anybody who has, but everybody knows you have. There you go. But I've never had. So I do know someone who has, but no one in my none of my teaching colleagues have had to in their roles. But it's always good to know that you know the route you go through should you need to do that. So hopefully everybody's clear of that. We've moved to, without anyone wanting to say anything else, we just simply have that the Cabinet adopts the updated whistleblowing policy as the recommendation. All those in favour? Oh, how nice after the last full council meeting where there was some disagreement, which I think was generally quite friendly at the end, that we've had a unanimous meeting tonight. Thank you, everybody. Close the meeting at, can't look at that, 7:26. We're 9 minutes late, 11 minutes later than I told my wife I would be. Thank you, everybody who spoke and contributed to the meeting tonight.